Hi, this is Mike Mennard, and this is our first lesson for ancient Western literature. And I'm calling this one, Why Do We Read? And I think it's one of the most troublesome questions I get. I am often asked by people of different fields, say nursing or education or biology, why do I have to take a literature class when it has absolutely nothing to do with nursing or biology or pick whatever field you have? Well, I could give a kind of a cynical answer and just say, well, that's the best reason to take it because it has nothing to do with nursing or biology or whatever field you're taking. Because you're going to discover that your life is a lot more than your career, a lot more than your field of study. And that, I think, maybe is a little too flippant. So I began to think, how do I answer this question? Because I grew up loving books. I grew up loving uh, stories. And so this was never something that I grappled with until I became a teacher. And so I want to answer this question the best I can. And I think the best way I can do it is talking about my son. So now my son believed with all of his heart that the greatest thing that there was McDonald's French fries. I mean, when he was little, there was no food greater than McDonald's French fries. I would try to explain to him that the day is coming when he will experience more sophisticated flavors than McDonald's French fries. Now, I love McDonald's French fries, don't get me wrong, but sometimes when I really want a truly pleasurable experience, it's not McDonald's French fries that I turn to. And and I think that's because the finer pleasures that we have are all acquired. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. I mean, think about that. All of the things that we really, really love that give us pleasure are an acquired taste or an acquired skill. I love sushi. I won't lie. I love sushi. If you're a vegetarian or you just don't like seafood, it must absolutely look disgusting. In my opinion, once you've had the raw tuna, you know, there's no going back to that cooked stuff. I love it. It's a sophisticated flavor with sophisticated art just in its creation. I love coffee. Uh, you know, when you're a kid, you don't always like the taste of coffee, but I tell you, coffee is definitely an acquired taste. But once you do, you often become a kind of coffee snob and you discover that there's a difference between cheap, you know, truck stop coffee and really high quality coffee. And all the foods that we love. I mean, think about it. When you want to go out for a really, really, really nice meal, you go to where there are some sophisticated flavors, maybe even flavors that as a kid you thought were disgusting. Well, I think that's true of all great pleasurable experiences, that we absolutely have to acquire them. Incidentally, that's not just true of food. Sometimes that's even true of other things. For example, I don't know if any of you uh, are sports aficionados. I don't know if you remember the first time perhaps you went skiing. It's miserable the first time you try to go skiing. I mean, it's just going down, falling, going down, falling, getting the occasional snow enema. It's not that fun. I don't know if any of you are musicians. It's not that fun to start playing an instrument. At first, for example, I play guitar. At first, it hurts your fingers to play. If any of you have ever taken piano lessons, you know the misery that is piano lessons. Sitting there trying to play a song and it just won't come. And yet, if you actually get to the point where you gain some mastery, over whatever instrument you may have, or whatever sport you may love, or whatever skill you have. My wife is a quilter. That took some training. It took a kind of acquired taste. But once you achieve some mastery, there are very few pleasures that could match it. So you sit down at the piano, and it took some practice to come to the place where you really began to enjoy what you were doing. And the Greeks have a word for this. They call it the sublime. Now, the sublime, we often use this term in our regular discussions, but I don't think we know exactly what the word means when we say it. So, for example, you might come home from a date, or maybe a roommate comes home from a date, and you say, "How was the date?" And if they liked the date, sometimes they'll say, "Ah, it was sublime." And you might say, "Well, tell me about her," or "Tell me about him." And you don't have the words for it, so you just say, "Well, I'm just telling you, she was sublime." And I'm not sure that that's exactly what they mean. Let me give you a definition here. First of all, the sublime could be defined as a difficult pleasure, often an acquired taste. I'm not sure that's the best way to describe a date, to say, she was a difficult pleasure and maybe an acquired taste. But I think the second definition absolutely fits what we're talking about. And this is the kind of sublime that we also mean, which is a moment of climactic pleasure at experience utter humanness or divinity. You see, I don't know if you notice the kind of sexual connotation there. That is by design, because the Greeks imagined that there was this moment that you would feel touched by something divine, and it might just be a momentary kind of pleasure, not unlike the pleasure of a climax in a sexual experience, something that doesn't last a long time, but it sure is, it's nice, and people then try very hard to achieve it again. I'm not saying all of you have experienced that, but if you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And this is the kind of experience that the Greeks imagined when they talked about that moment of pleasure, an acquired pleasure, one that you worked toward, one that you had to cultivate in order to come to the place where you actually got to have the experience. You don't just get to have that experience with somebody often just by meeting them. Sometimes it takes years of a relationship before that happens. That's the kind of experience that we think of when we think of great literature and other great difficult pleasures. And they imagined it, and I think it's a wonderful way of imagining it. They imagined it as a kind of being touched by the gods. So, and I love this great sculpture by Stanislava Kuzma, The Muses. So in Greek mythology, Zeus has daughters. In some of the stories, there are only 3 daughters. In some of them, there are 7. Although the majority of the stories, he has 7 daughters that are called the Muses. And each one of these daughters, these goddesses, has been given the spark of ecstasy, if you will, at experiencing different kinds of creative endeavors. There's actually a muse for history, a muse for architecture, a muse for sculpture and art. But the queen of all the muses is Calliope, and she is the muse who inspires poetry. Because the Greeks believed that sometimes you would have that moment when you experience something beautiful, where you feel like Robert Frost would talk about the hairs on the back of your neck standing on end. And this could only be uh, compared to perhaps being touched by something divine. It's hard to say whether the Greeks actually believed that there were literally muses, literally goddesses touching them, but the truth is it's a wonderful metaphor. And we have similar things as well. In our culture, of course, we may not have the metaphor of being touched by something divine when we have that moment of creativity. We come from a technological culture. So when we think of having that aha moment, that wow moment, that climactic moment, we use it with a technological metaphor. You'll often see it in cartoons where you'll see the scientist gets this great idea and ding, and what appears over his head or her head? A light bulb. We don't believe a literal light bulb is up there. It's just a metaphor of the light coming on, that divine spark of creativity. That's the kind of thing that we're after here. That's the kind of thing that the Greeks believed in. That's the kind of thing that I would say I certainly believe in. And it's certainly the kind of thing that people through the centuries, even millennia, when reading the works that we're going to read in this class, felt when they encountered them. We're going to read works like Homer's The Odyssey. And people for 3,000 years have read that epic poem and felt a divine sense of pleasure, a divine sense of realization, and people still feel it. When people read Oedipus or see it on a stage, when people see a Shakespeare play, and it still happens today when you see a film that you really, really love and it touches you. My question to you is, have you ever had that experience in your life? Have you ever allowed yourself to actually develop the skills needed to be able to take in sophisticated kinds of pleasures? Things like reading great literature, experiencing great art, perhaps at a museum, experiencing quality foods, experiencing hands-on, beautiful music. Even the ability to enjoy music at a concert hall requires effort on your part. You need to actually develop some knowledge to know what's going on, and you need to have the patience to take in the material as it's coming to you in order to have that experience of the sublime. It's that moment of creation. It's that moment of feeling like God has touched me. So have you ever felt that? I hope you have. I hope you have in some way. We are going to be searching for that. If you're wondering why we read great literature, it's because we're after that experience. It's a shared experience that we would have with great thinkers across centuries. And I think it's worth pursuing because it's the kind of thing that can spur a beautiful creative life, a beautiful interior life of your own. That's what we're after here. We are totally after this kind of divine sense that we are going to feel something divine. Now, I'm going to ask you for just a little exercise here. I'm going to ask you to stop the video, and I'm giving you a link here in Moodle to a video that is from one of my very favorite poets. His name is Dana Gioia. Now, Dana Gioia is a marvelous modern poet. He also, though, was the head of the National Endowment for the Arts for a number of years. And in doing so, when he was the chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, he brought about a study trying to find out what happens when people read, so that we can give a good reason why we should read. And what he came up with is something not so different than what we're talking about here. A lot of people say we read great works to be better people. I don't believe that, because if reading great literature made us better people, then the English majors on any campus would be the best people on campus. And I can say from experience, no offense, they're not. And if it's the cultural experience of taking in these works that makes us better people, then people in the social sciences would be the best people on campus. But they're not. I'm even going to go so far as to say, because some of the works we're going to look at are from the Bible. And this is going to sound like a heresy, but even reading the Bible will not, in and of itself, make you a better person. Because if it does, then our theology majors would be the best people on campus. Because the answer to that, by the way, is we believe that there's something truly and literally divine that happens when we read the Bible, and that's the touching of the Holy Spirit. That's what makes us better. So it's not so heretical after all. So I want you to watch this, because he's going to talk a little bit about why we should read. I'm arguing for a divine sort of pleasure, but he's actually going to argue, not disagree, I don't think, but argue that it will make you a little better. So go ahead and watch that. It's not very long. And then I have an attached assignment that I would like you to do. Just put down some of your own thoughts. And that will be lesson 1 for our class. This is how it works. And we're going to have a great time this summer. So enjoy. It's good to get to know you a little bit, even if it's imagination here. So anyway, I will talk to you real soon.